And so I've noticed that I think better when I'm walking. And so that's why I do that. If anyone gets seasick, I've been told the best thing to do is to do it, put a Post-it note over my picture so that you don't see it and you just hear me. But mostly I think you'll be seeing the slides. So let me go ahead and share them. Okay, so actually I'm very excited to give this talk. I've never given the talk about these ideas in this particular way. So I'm hoping that they could be of use. So I'm going to go ahead and make my screen full screen. Can everyone see the slides?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you so much. So I'm here from the Institute for Love of Time, which is my nonprofit, but also the Institute of Noetic Sciences, where I'm a fellow, and the University of San Diego, where I have an affiliate professorship in the Department of Physics and Biophysics. So I'm representing multiple organizations, but of course, everything I say is my own opinion. And I got a graphic artist to make these animated images, and they go very slowly across the screen, which is helpful because it takes me a while to describe them. So this is one model of time, which is sort of the standard model, which is kind of silly when you look at it, but it's like nothing exists until the present moment. And then we observe it, and then it comes into existence, and then it's sort of frozen in the past.
Sorry, Julia, it looks like your screen is frozen. We only see the first slide and all the slides on the left side.
Ah, so you don't see a bar moving across the screen?
No. At least I don't. Yeah, now you swapped slide. And now it's moving. Yes, now we see it.
Okay. Yep. So this is, thank you so much. I think it might not work in full screen mode, the animated GIF. So this is an image that a graphic artist did for me. It's the way we normally see time. It doesn't make any sense, but it's the idea that the future doesn't exist until we observe it. And the past is sort of set in stone after we observe it. So you can see, landing on the moon. This is from an American point of view. World Trade Center, coronavirus, which is a more global point of view. And then, we're going into flying cars as my computer spins to manage that. So the point of this slide is to say, and it's probably very similar to what, actually, I know it's very similar to what many other people are saying right now, which is our sense of time, our way that we think about time has to change because it doesn't represent accurately what's true. And in order for us to actually manage survival in the next century, our sense of time better represent what's actually happening. And so here's a better representation, I think, which is that this is a bar that represents attention in the present moment. And as that makes its way across time, we are aware of something that we call the present moment, but the past, present, and future are there the whole time. It's not that they come into being. And therefore, as a result of that, it's possible that we could get information from or give information to these different moments in time. So this is more what I believe is actually happening with time. So our consciousness has biased us because we only see a slice of the picture at any one moment. Our consciousness has biased us to think that nothing else exists but what we are examining. And instead, it's just a small slice of the pie. And so acknowledging that and being able to use the information that doesn't come from the present moment is part of what we need to do, I believe, to survive. So that leads into, what do I mean by time travel? What I'm talking about here, although sometimes I work with people on other things like physical or mental time travel, but what I'm talking about here is informational time travel. So receiving or transmitting accurate information about events that are not within the usual purview of an observer. So you might say, if you were a physicist, not within the light cone of the observer. Or in the backwards light, might be in the backwards light cone if you're a physicist. So an example would be receiving the winning lottery numbers the day prior to the lottery. which is actually equivalent to sending yourself the winning lottery numbers the day after the lottery numbers have been announced. So in order to receive information, it must be sent. So these two things, these are two ends of a loop. So this includes conscious precognition. I'm going to try to make my slides big again. This includes conscious precognition. Don't worry, I'll get to it. Never fear. The slow computer must go through its paces. So this includes conscious precognition that can be acted upon usefully, but it also includes physical phenomena. So that's where you get into this physical time travel. And that's where you get into the physical component of informational time travel. So I'll talk about all that again, so don't worry if it's not clear. So what does informational time travel have to do with consciousness? So the common response is that such effects suggest that consciousness is not physical. This is the non-materialist view, and I'm sympathetic with people who go with that view, and I've even wrote a textbook with Mossbridge about it, but I don't think it's necessarily true that these particular precognition or informational time travel effects actually have something to do with consciousness not being physical. I don't know that you can prove that from this, but my answer that I like to give, that I think is more accurate, is that we don't yet know the answer, but it's entirely possible that consciousness is itself a product of informational time travel. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is that the relationship between informational time travel and consciousness could be like the working of a bulldozer tread. So at least in the States, we see these bulldozers all over, and they have these treads here that go around in an elongated circle, in an ellipse like this, and they push the bulldozer forward. So if you imagine...
I'm sorry, but I think the PowerPoint task isn't following along. Oh, there it is. I will see it.
Let's see, did you see this slide?
No, I think we missed that one.
Okay. So I will not use full screen mode. Can you read this slide?
Yeah, we can see that slide.
Okay. So this is just saying, what do I mean by time travel? I'm talking about informational time travel. And I give the example of receiving the winning lottery numbers and point out that this includes conscious precognition that can be acted upon usefully. And then what does it have to do with consciousness? My answer is we don't yet know the answer, but it's possible that consciousness is itself a product of informational time travel. So what do I mean by that? Here's this bulldozer. And the way this bulldozer is working is it has these treads that are pushing against the earth, creating friction that drive this, the cab of the bulldozer forward in this direction. So what's going on in terms of, why am I using this as a model? Because it could be that the contents of consciousness could be determined by whatever the treads pick up from the future and bring up to consciousness. So let's imagine that this line delineates the difference between unconscious detection of events and the conscious experience of events. So for the unconscious detection of events, this is the past and this is the future because it's moving in this direction. For the conscious experience of events, this is the past and this is the future because it's moving in that direction. And so this would pick up little pebbles and things from the ground. And when they go over here and get past this line and come up, then they would become conscious. And so it's possible that this informational time travel, what we consider to be informational time travel, you're getting information about the future experience of consciousness. You're getting it from the unconscious in a regular order of events, except backwards in time. That this could actually be what produces what the contents of consciousness, not consciousness itself, but the contents of consciousness. So in case you're interested in that hypothesis, I write about it more here in this article called Time Loops. It's a book review of a book by Eric Wargo, which I think is excellent. And I talk about this idea that consciousness could actually be projected from the future through these unconscious processes. So I'm sure I'm not the first to think of this. I believe that that Whitehead actually talked a little bit about this, and maybe there's one other person whose name, I mean, there's people who talk about this. This is not an original idea. I just think it's a particularly good one, and I like the bulldozer model because it makes it visually clear how that could happen. So I would like to talk about precognition as a model of informational time travel. And I like to show this slide because it divides up the different kinds of precognition, at least in my view. It divides them into quadrants according to level of consciousness. So that's this axis. And the lead time between the presentation of the question and then the presentation of the answer. The answer is the thing that is being detected precognitively. So when there's a short lead time and people are not conscious of the content of the information, that is essentially physiological precognition, also called presentiment or predictive anticipatory activity, and behavioral precognition. This is a short time scale and unconscious. There's this borderline case of what I call compulsive precognition. So that's also been called PMIR, or side-mediated instrumental response. What that is, it's on the borderline because it's in the seconds to minutes range. And it's sort of conscious and sort of not, because what an example of this is when a mother has a feeling she should go into her child's bedroom at that moment, that she must go into her baby's bedroom. The baby's not crying, she just feels she should go in there. And then the baby's lying face down and not breathing. And she's happy to have been there, but she's not conscious of why she was taken into the room. So that's a kind of a compulsive experience, compulsive or PMIR experience. Dream precognition can be minutes to weeks to even months. So having a dream about a future event that is veridical, that has accurate information, largely unconscious in a certain sense, but also very conscious, because the whole reason that it becomes precognitive is that you remember the dream. So that's here. And then at the high end here, both in the lead time and in your awareness of the content, is conscious waking precognition, such as remote viewing. So you can actually sit down or stand up and do a remote viewing session and precognitively detect a future event. So this is the way I think of precognition or informational time travel, including human experience. And I'll talk a little bit about the physics of it, but I wanted to start briefly with just a few examples. So physiological precognition, this is also called presentiment or predictive anticipatory activity, is how I came out of the closet into the world of researchers of psychic capacities with this paper, which was a meta-analysis of predictive physiological anticipation, which I ended up later changing to predictive anticipatory activity. This is where your body knows that there's a future event that's either positive or negative, but your conscious awareness does not. And so the physiology measures pick up on it. The reason I'm showing you this is so many people have looked at this paper. Only about 10% of them are scientists, even though it's a very technical paper. And that suggests that there are people who are absolutely fascinated by this, who want to learn more about this. And so I think it's an example of how important it is to bring what we call psychic activity out into the world. But the basic result is that there's a highly statistically significant effect when you look at 26 studies across more than I think it was 3 decades. Yeah, 3 decades at least, maybe 4, showing that this is in fact happening. It is a very conservative analysis. And Patrizio Tresoldi followed up with an even more conservative Bayesian analysis that showed the same thing, essentially. So that's down here. This is also part of why it's so hard to get people to recognize that this capacity exists, because the best evidence for it that is acceptable to people is the evidence from an unconscious process. So they are not aware of it. And so that makes it difficult. However,
Julia, may I raise a question about your figures?
Sure.
It looked to me that they were extremely significant. Is that
Yes.
your
Yeah.
conclusion? extremely
Yes.
significant. Yeah.
Yes, you would
Yeah,
not, these are
thank you for
5 and
confirming.
6, yeah, 5 and 6 sigma. This is not, it's very hard to get this effect not to happen. Let's put it that way. This is a real effect. This is something that's going on. So, so that's some of the best evidence down here. Also, other pieces of the best evidence are from this part, this extreme part of the diagram. So the conscious waking precognition, this is the part, you're probably familiar with the military funding in the US for the remote viewing program from 1972 to 1995 that in the end was called Stargate. A lot of it was precognitive. A lot of
Yes,
this,
we have had Ed May talking about this several times in Sweden.
and I'm sure you've seen this figure. So, but just for those who haven't, this is an example from a class that Stephen Schwartz gave. He, just for fun, before Saddam Hussein was found, he asked his class, should we try to figure out where Saddam Hussein is going to be caught? And one of the members of the class ended up drawing this area here, which turned out to be this building, which was a picture released by the Department of Defense after where Saddam Hussein was caught. And then someone else drew this Saddam down here with a vent tube coming up here, which mimics, in fact, the picture released by the Department of Defense. So there's the kind of example of what you can do precognitively there. And so what I did was I wanted to get more data from people around the world and look at what factors influenced this kind of precognition. So it's remote viewing. And I created a book called The Premonition Code and created a portion of the website, thepremonitioncode.com/tester, where you can try your hand at this kind of thing. And it walks you through the steps. So here's an example. It walks you through 6 steps. I'm not going to show you all 6 steps. They're all based on standard remote viewing practices. But in the end, what you are asked to do once you've created your session, which takes between 5 and 30 minutes, you're to select one of 2 graphs, and they're mutually exclusive in terms of what they represent. So each graph represents multiple elements. So in case you cannot see this, words, symbols, and/or ideas are over here. Vegetation and/or food, space and/or sky, human-made structures, hills, mountains, rocks, electricity, fire, rapid movements, water, and animals, humans, and their likeness. So these are representing 2 images. At the time, the software does not know, no one knows which image is going to be the target. The person who is doing the viewing, their job is to try to select which one of these matches their session. And then once they do select, one of those is randomly selected. And so the one that was selected in this case is a quote. So that was clearly this one, where just words, symbols, and/or ideas were in the target. And so this is a quote by a physicist, Lise Meitner. Life need not be easy, provided only that it is not empty. And at the base, I say, remember to send loving feelings back to yourself while you were working. And the reason I say that is because of what I'm about to show you. So anecdotally, remote viewers say that a feeling of love, joy, playfulness helps their accuracy. And anecdotally, they say targets with interesting, or what Stephen Schwartz calls numinous features, help accuracy. So I investigated those factors. And in a group of 32 this is not online, this is in laboratory participants who did a 2-minute remote viewing session untrained, they had above chance performance with what I'm calling here long delay precognition, but is essentially precognitive remote viewing. Chance performance is at 1. So the group of people who had high, this is a median split on feelings of unconditional love. The group of people who had high feelings of unconditional love performed significantly better than chance, and also performed significantly better than those who had low feelings of unconditional love. The people who had low feelings of unconditional love did not perform better than chance. So that matches this anecdotal point from viewers, at least that one study. I have a follow-up study funded by the Bial Foundation and also in collaboration with Windbridge Institute, where we are checking this with a bunch of online viewers, around 200 or so, to see if this is also the case. But that may be the case. Now, the second thing I wanted to check on was whether targets with interesting features help accuracy. So this is from the Premonition Code website. And it does seem that interesting future targets seem to draw precognitive attention. And this is the first analysis from the first year. And this is a pre-registered confirmatory analysis. And let me explain what these are. So the darker bars, the filled bars, are correct versus unfilled bars are incorrect, okay? On the left, we have all the data. And on the y-axis, and I'll explain these other bars in a second. On the y-axis, we have the proportion rated interesting. So what I did was I took the top targets that were most likely to be correct and the top targets that were most likely to be incorrect. So there were certain targets that people just kept getting wrong, and there were certain targets that people kept getting right. And I took those and I contrasted with them pairwise with each other in a series of questionnaires for individuals on Amazon Mechanical Turk. And the questionnaires would say, which of these two images do you think is more interesting? I didn't define numinous and I didn't define any of that. I just said, which is more interesting? And I gave them the choices, the one on the left, the one on the right, or I don't know. Most of them are actually, most people actually were able to pick one or the other. And I gave that to 80 different taskers, judges. I didn't tell them anything about remote viewing or precognition or time travel. I just asked them which image is most interesting. And it just happened to be the case that the correct and the incorrect images were randomly paired left and right. And what I found is the ones that were more likely to be correct were significantly more likely to be rated interesting than incorrect. So what are these other columns? Here's all the data for the first year and then for the second year. I thought maybe because they're seeing that, the participants are seeing the contents of the possible targets beforehand, it's possible that they would make have a consistent bias away from, for instance, choosing this one because it doesn't seem as interesting than this one, right? And in fact, the judges might also have the same bias. So even though this shouldn't affect the results, because of course the software doesn't know which one has, software is just a binary process. But regardless, I also looked at all of the targets that had no words in them, all of the targets that had no subjects in them, all of the targets that had only a single element in them in case it was an element-wise comparison. And in every case, it's looking like the ones that are more likely to be correct are more likely to be rated interesting. So let me give you an example of these images so you get a sense. And I'm going to actually ask you to vote. I'm going to show you two sets of images, and I'm going to ask you to vote on which is more interesting. Here's image set 1. Okay, there's this, this, this. That's image set 1. Now we're going to have image set 2. Okay, so let's go back to those. Image set 1 or image set 2, which was most interesting to you?
Number 1 to me.
Number 1? Maybe you could hold up a finger if I could see your video, 1 or 2. Which is most interesting? 1, 1, 1, 1, 2. Okay, yeah, so most people 1, 1, 1, yeah. 1, 1. A large number of people say 1. Yes, well, that makes sense to me. That is the one that people were more likely to get correct. People were more likely to get this correct than something like this, even though they're both plants. And so the idea is that the interest in the target is drawing this kind of, it's easy. Another way to put it in the informational time travel sense is it's easier to send or more, it's a bigger, stronger signal to send back in time, something like this, than it is to send something like this. So that's super interesting to me. So that paper, I'm going to be presenting more about that at the Society for Scientific Exploration, PA, if they accept my abstract. But that's very interesting to me. So I want to talk a little bit about this. I'm fascinated by this. I've had precognitive dreams. I do remote viewing precognitively. I've measured my own physiology. I've seen my own behavioral precognition. I have all those, I'm skilled in all these areas and have been for most of my life, but only have measured it as an adult scientist. Compulsive precognition is something that happens to me all the time. And I'm fascinated by it. It's almost impossible to study, except for in terms of anecdotal stories, which I kind of don't care about because I already know that I've had these things and I already know that I'm liable to have the human bias of a confirmation bias. So I don't, I kind of don't care. So it's like, I want to understand how it works. So I think it's extremely hard to study that in the lab because it's spontaneous. So I decided to try to study the potential physical substrate. I'm trying to find an informational time travel physical substrate on the seconds to minutes scale. So what physical phenomenon are on the seconds to minutes time frame that might support something like compulsive precognition? Because this is the part of precognition that people don't actually have to believe in or even know about. They just feel like, well, I felt like I was doing this and I did it. I felt this was important and I did it. And so it's practically universal. I mean, I hear from so many people who experience this. I want to say most people have had this experience by the time they're an adult. So I started thinking about the double slit experiment. So just briefly, I'm sure you all know about the double slit, but maybe there's one or two people who don't. So I'm briefly going to describe it. You have a low level light source that's emitting about 1 photon at a time. And you have a double slit that's in some kind of barrier. And what you end up on a screen over here, what you end up with is an interference pattern. And one of the reasons this is so mysterious is, of course, why do you get an interference pattern? There's only 1 photon in the system at a time. So it seems like the photon is going through both of those holes. And in fact, this is what we assume. This is the standard sort of interpretation. You have a photon, it's going through both of these holes. Don't talk to us about how it's doing it. It's mysterious. And you get an interference pattern. You could think of the photon as a wave, and it's easier to see how you'd have this interference pattern. But the weird part of thinking about it as a wave is that when it lands on this screen, there's only 1 little dot. It doesn't land in the shape of a wave, like a water wave. It lands as a little dot. So it's quirky. And there's something about it that doesn't make sense. And it's fun and mysterious. And I couldn't help every time, for about 10 years, every time I heard about this explanation, I thought, well, now that's interesting. We're going to decide that we're going to make quirky, we're going to make some weird explanation, which we have to, like there has to be a weird explanation for this. We're going to make it in space rather than in time. We're going to decide that what's non-local is the activity of this photon in space. But we could equally decide something else. But first, let's talk about what we actually observe in space-time. 1, the lamp is on for a certain duration. 2, we see an interference pattern made of individual absorptions. So let's stop thinking that for sure this is what's going on. And let's just take, what do we know? This is what we know. So I think it's equally possible that this is happening. A photon that will be emitted in the future, so a not yet emitted photon, is going through this other slit and interfering with a photon that has just been emitted and going through this slit, causing an interference pattern. And maybe this photon that's not yet emitted, maybe there's a rule that it's not absorbed yet because it's not yet been emitted, but it can interfere. It can interfere, but it can't be absorbed. So that seems crazy, but also just as crazy as saying that it's in 2 places at once and then all of a sudden it's only in 1 place. So like, why not try to look at this? The great thing about this is that there's actually an experiment you can do to test it. And so I did that experiment. So just briefly, let's look at it as in the time cone model. So this is, sorry, a light cone. This is a light cone. So we have the present at the current location. Here's your x-axis in space. We're flattening everything, so you just have this space and time axis. And you have this photon here is traveling on this 45-degree angle, so at the speed of light. So it could, in the past it was here, and in the future it's going to be here. A human being might be going through, in a rocket ship, might be going through here, but a photon's here. It's possible the photon could be absorbed before it's emitted, and also might later be absorbed again after being emitted. That's another possibility. So I had talked about this rule here, where maybe it's not absorbed, maybe it can interfere. Another possibility is it's absorbed both times. I don't know. I'm not a physicist. I just think it's cool and interesting to think about this. So another way of thinking about this is assume all photons are available to be absorbed. Okay. When I say all photons, I mean all photons in an experiment that will ever be emitted by a light source. Assume that they are all available to be absorbed, including those that are not yet emitted at a particular present. So when you know that you're going to have a short duration of an experiment, you have this many photons in a pile sitting around. When you have a medium duration, you have this many photons in a pile sitting around. And you have a long duration, you have this many photons in a pile sitting around, okay? How many photons are absorbed in an equivalent amount of time? You take that same amount of time in a short duration, you have a small amount of photons in the pile that can come through. Medium duration, you have more. Long duration, you have more, same amount of time. I'm trying to show in these pictures that this is the same amount of time, although it's hard to see that. I probably need a bar over here to show that. So I know this seems like incorrect thinking, and it is. It's absolutely wrong. But it also made me, this thinking made me do the experiment, which showed a result that is also absolutely weird. So here's the equipment that I have. I did a crowdfunding campaign to buy a, I originally did this experiment as a pilot in a hand-run version at IONS with Dean Radin's setup. And then I did the crowdfunding campaign because I got interesting results. And I got this for my house, and I hired an engineer to hook up an automatic manipulator to some software. And then I wrote some software to detect the photons. I edited some software that I had from Arnaud Delorme to detect some photons. And so I had a system where I could randomly run it all day. By randomly run it, I mean use a quantum random number generator to determine how long each duration of each experiment would be, and measure the photons at every point during those quote unquote runs. So I used 4 different durations. This is about 11-minute duration. This is about a 5-minute duration. This is about a 3-minute duration. And over here, this is about a 1-minute duration, this purple. So what you see here are the mean photon counts at each of these points, observation points. And these mean values are the means of what's on the left, which is before the decision was made about how long it would be. And these mean values are mean values of all these, which is of course after the decision was made about how long it would be on. And this is 500 independent runs. This is one study. I've done a bunch of these studies. All I can tell you is it's very hard not to get the effect where before the decision is made, you have a consistent relationship between the number of photons here and the number of photons that will follow. This looks almost identical to how it looks in the physiology, and potentially may relate to the compulsive precognition, I'm not sure. Anyway, I have a paper that was actually just rejected from arXiv. I didn't know papers could be rejected from arXiv. But they sat on it for 2 months, 3 months. No, I sent it in January, it's April, 4 months. They sat on it for 4 months. And then they just wrote me a note today saying it wasn't of sufficient value. But I published it a couple months ago on ResearchGate, and a bunch of physicists have read it and commented on it. So I don't care. But anyway, it's just rather fascinating. So this is really important. So when you calculate this effect over the 3 experiments that use the same parameters, the effect is between 5 and 6 sigma. And there's something going on here. So again, this might tell us something about what's going on with photons, but I'm sort of hoping it also tells us something because it's in the seconds. This is retrocausality in the seconds to minutes range. I'm hoping it can tell us something about this and just about consciousness in general. I think that physical, what it's telling us is that physical processes, oh, I want to stop my slide share. I'll explain that in a second when my full, I think it's telling us that things are more like this. I think it's telling us things are more like this. And I want to say something about that more clearly in a second, but I wanted to thank you all, Swedish SBR, ION, CIIS, University of San Diego, TILT, Mark Bacuzzi, Woodbridge Institute, Dean Radin, Lauren Carpenter, Arnold DeLorme, Adam Crabtree, Marcia Neeson, Hummingbird Fund, the Quantum Gravity Research Organization, and experiment.com. And what I wanted to say is that I feel like what the photon experiments are showing us is that, look, when you calculate the volume of a box, right, you must have the width and you must have the height, but you also must have the depth. And I think that we have been forever trying to calculate the volume of a box without the depth because the depth is in time. And I think what it's teaching us is that you can't calculate, you can't understand what's going on in one slice of this box without understanding the depth. It affects the calculation. And so understanding duration as a primitive, as a fundamental unit, and that defines behavior in the now, even when the duration goes into the future, I think is an important missing piece in our understanding of both consciousness and physics. But maybe that's just me looking for my keys where the lamplight is shining, because that's what I've been looking at, you know. But that is what I've been looking at, and so that's what I can say about that. I can only talk about what I've been seeing. So thank you, everybody. Any questions?
Many thanks, Julia. Quite interesting ideas. Rather new to me, but I recognize many parts of it. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, the recent paper you talked about, the 2021 paper there, that you got rejected from archive. Is it possible for us to get a copy and read it, or?
Yes, one moment. I'll put a link to it in the chat window.
Great.
Anyone who's interested in replicating those effects, I would love to talk with you. It doesn't cost that much money, maybe $10,000 or less to replicate the effect if you have, you know, some grant funding or something. I have a friend at, I forget how to pronounce it, DESY in Germany, the accelerator. He's interested in potentially replicating it. We'll see. You know, there's someone at Berkeley who's considering replicating it, and a couple other people. So anyway, replication is very good for this stuff because I'm very confident they'll find the same effect.
Yes, yes.
Been finding it for 2 years, so it's like, all right.
Okay. Yes, yes. Any more questions?
And did I confuse anyone? Because I can also explain things in different ways that are less confusing if you tell me you're confused and tell me what you're confused by. And I know that some of this stuff can be confusing.
Yeah, I think I have one question, and it's about a time perspective, that we see little tiny slices, or we're conscious of tiny slices in time and space, but it's already laid out. You showed as an image, it's already there. I heard that idea before, but it's very hard to grasp because then it's like the reality has already been created. We can't change it. And somehow, yeah, go ahead, please.
Well, so people often jump to this conclusion that if the reality is there, it can't be changed. That's not true. So like, it is not necessarily the case that just because a reality is there, it can't be changed, either in the future or in the past. It doesn't, it doesn't follow. Like it could be, for instance, you could take a many worlds view, for instance, of reality, and think, yeah, the reality is all laid out in all these different universes, but perhaps you could travel between universes with your choices, right? I make a choice to go down over to this universe. And so it's laid out, but it's different experience from another universe that makes a choice to go in a different direction, right? So that is one example of how it doesn't have to be set in stone. The reason I say this is because it's not psychologically good for people to think that everything is set in stone. Like we're not ready for that, I don't think. I think that it may be the case that it is set in stone, but I don't think we have the cultural and psychological tools that we need yet to relax about that and just say, well, then I guess it's okay. You know, to me, I find it very relaxing to think that it's set in stone because it's like, good. Yes. Right? I just don't have to worry about anything. It is what it is. But most people don't feel that way. Most people get helpless and hopeless. And so I feel like there's some, if it is the case that it's set in stone, psychologically, there's some work we need to do. And that's why I created the nonprofit Institute for Love and Time. I'm gonna put that in the chat window, loveandtime.org. It's about mixing the scientific pursuit of time travel with the scientific pursuit of unconditional love, because we are going to need the experience of unconditionally loving each other if we're going to actually have time travel and recognize that it's happening right now, right? We're going to need both of those experiences, because you start to recognize someone does something horrible. It's not their fault. They're built into the pattern that way. So anyway, but right now, the best tool I can give people is to just say, just think of the universe as, and maybe it's true, maybe it is malleable. Personally, I think what we're learning is that we're just wish to have control.
Yeah.
I have a question, please.
Yeah.
You show this beautiful bar that are moving over time, that our consciousness is just seeing, in a word, a part of the time. But what is your thinking about seeing it all at once and these people doing this?
Yeah, I think there are definitely certain states in consciousness, and certainly when you're doing remote viewing, I don't know if you have any experience with going into those states or anything, but there's certainly states of, right. States of timelessness, or states in consciousness and meditation, or altered states of the psychedelics, where it feels like you can get information all at once, like having an eye that sees 360 degrees around your head, sort of, except with respect to time. And so, for sure. But what does that tell us? That gives us more information that, in fact, time isn't just, things don't just exist in the now. I mean, what's also funny with this, I do work with people in terms of hope. So one of the things I study is hope and how people can increase their level of hope. And one way to increase hope is to connect with it yourself mentally over time. And the funny thing is, we carry within ourselves an image, representations of our past and futures, our past and future selves. We carry that already within us. We say, when I was 3 years old, this is how I was. And when I'm on my deathbed, I want it to be like this. You know, we have these images. So we know that we exist over time. We know that. And that's a common cultural thing throughout the world, is this, we don't have this experience of like, well, here I am, and I'm a completely new person. And, you know, that's just not the experience we have unless there's a neurological problem, right? So we know we exist through time. That is, in fact, our experience. And the way I work with people in terms of hope is just telling them, like, that's real. Like, you can talk to your past self. You can connect with your future self. And that has a real impact on the now. And you don't even have to develop psychic abilities to do it. You don't have to talk about it as something woo-woo and out there. It's just the situation. It's just what we already do. The question is, what do you want your relationship with your past and future selves to be like? They're already there. So it's one of the easy access points for people.
And a follow-up question, if you then can see it all at once, I mean, see with your consciousness, how about changing things? Is it possible to then also change it all at the same time?
Sure. If you hold in your mind the model that change is possible, right, then your perception of change, you would have the experience that change was possible and that you changed things. Okay? But another view of that experience, I'm not saying which one is correct, although you could tell which one I think is correct. Another view of that experience is that it was always going to be the case that you were going to think that you were going to change things. Then you tried to change things, and it was always going to be the case that things were going to appear to be changed. In other words, I'm not convinced that it's our job as human beings to learn more about how to control things according to our will. I'm not convinced that that is what we're doing here. In fact, I'm kind of thinking that part of what we're doing here is acknowledging that we are not the center of the universe, and that there is beauty in what is true and what is already there. This is a spiritual point, right? But that there is beauty in what is true and what is already there, and loving that. But this sort of, I mean, it's been thousands of years, but this goal our goal is to change, and that we can only know that we're okay if we can control and change. I think that's shifting, and I think that has to shift.
So, sorry, just one more.
No, that's fine.
So then letting go of the control and just accepting and being in the right now will also might open up the whole time slot.
Well, so the thing is, what's ironic about, so the way I define unconditional love, you remember that result about unconditional love? The way I define unconditional love is loving what is true right now without any requirement to change it. So ironically, that experience allows you, not ironically, perhaps completely logically, that experience allows you to perceive what is true in the future or the past, right? And so, in other words, putting as a priority the goal to change things could potentially block you from seeing things as they are, and actually helping you based on the future, right? Let's put it in the sense of climate change. If we, like I did a project with a bunch of psychics and we worked on with climate scientists on climate change. One of the questions the climate scientists wanted to know the answer to was what climate mitigation actually ends up working, right? So if you're in a state where you can say, okay, you know, climate change is, maybe we end up with mitigation, let's look at what actually works. You could receive that information better than if you're like, no, we're gonna do this other thing, you know. So it's just like, it always comes back to that Buddhist point about, like, if you're going to be attached to the outcome, good luck getting to the outcome.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Beautiful.
Yeah. Thanks.
So my name's Rose, and I really feel I might just interject quickly here with the insight I was having, because in terms of just being able to see everything at once, in the universe. Connie, I just made a comment on Facebook the other day because I was thinking of the Lorentz equation, the time dilation equation, where the faster you go approaching the speed of light, the more the space component shrinks, so that there's no space left basically at the speed of light. So you kind of just are everywhere at once when you're traveling at that speed. You have the access to every point in the universe from the speed of light that you don't have as you approach the speed of light. You only have that at the speed of light. There's no space left. There's nothing between you and any other thing. So at this point, I really begin to think that we do have free will, because then we can choose what we want to look at, what we want to do. It's an interesting thought that I've just been having lately because of a discussion on Facebook. So I thought I'd bring up the Lorentz equation because it's part of this whole, Einsteinian concept of how space-time works. And this experiment that you're doing, I mean, you're dealing with a photon at the speed of light. It can just be wherever it wants. It can be everywhere. So I think that what's going on in that moment is quite the mystery.
Is it okay if I comment on that comment?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So it's not my understanding that space goes away when a photon is, electromagnetic waves are traveling at the speed of light. It's the shrinkage is real, but that doesn't mean that space shrinks to nothing. But what I do think you might be getting at is this other point. Kind of reminds me of Richard Feynman, if you've ever read Quantum Electrodynamics, which is a great lay audience book, and also.
Oh yeah, I'm a fan of Richard Feynman for sure.
Yeah. And he was thinking that, actually, I think his mentor more likely that he took it on, this idea that every electron is just one electron. Well, you could have a similar idea about every photon is just one photon. So the photons are bosonic particles. So a photon, so one of the implications of that is that a photon is the same as another photon to the extent that it shares the same momentum, frequency, and phase. It's the same one, even if one was emitted, in Young's experiment back, century or more ago, and the other was emitted 2,000 years in the future. If it has those
I see
features.
what you're saying, but I don't agree with that particular theory myself, because apparently no particles can occupy the same point in space, even photons. Like that just isn't possible. So I wouldn't subscribe to that theory, but I do think that there are an infinite number of photons according to the theory, and that every single one of them is everywhere at once. They kind of are like the fabric of space. They sort of make up reality in that sense. Like what reality is made of seems to me is photons. And they have this amazing property that can be accessed by our brains, because our brains are full of photons and waves, and that's where this conscious activity is taking place. So somehow we're interfacing with photons in our brains in terms of being able to access the information from photons that are everywhere in the universe, and we can follow these signals. So I'm kind of developing a theory. I'm starting to write about this as well, how it all works.
Okay.
Yeah.
The only thing I would caution, if you're interested in this caution, which you may not be, is that just because we want there to be free will and we would like there to be free will doesn't mean there is free will.
Yeah, but when you've got so many people that are trying to take it away, you have to wonder if it may be real, because it seems so valuable and so many people want to eliminate it. And that's what I find in my life, that a lot of the time my choices are being curtailed by someone else's choices. And that doesn't seem right either, like.
Well, that doesn't feel good for sure, but I don't know if that has anything to do with free will. That's what I'm saying. But that for sure doesn't feel good. I agree. And I would not vote for that.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, this is what's going on right now in the world. We're having this discussion exactly. Thank you so much.
All right, take care. I think there's some questions in the chat as well, but I didn't get a chance to see them. Should I go ahead and answer them? One from Jan and one from Eric?
Yes. Let's
Okay.
see.
Jan, can you write the link to the online test you showed before? Oh, sure. And just notice at this website, let me go get it. I'm going to share the screen so you can see what I'm talking about. Has it failed? Hold on. Let me share my screen again.
Något som pågår här så att jag tittar på det nu.
I think screen sharing, what's going on? Okay, so the website is failing, and I think it doesn't have to do with the website. I think it has to do with Zoom. So, but basically it is thepremonitionco.com/tester. And
Om du inte vill så kan jag höra det.
yeah, you can go there and you register your email address. The only thing you can't do if you're outside of the US is you can't sign the consent form because we only are approved for inside US participants, but you can still do all the experiments. Eric says, can we affect or change? But see, those might be different things. Let's talk about the difference between influence and change. Can we affect, change our future, get ourselves to be lucky, win a lottery? Can you, what does it mean to affect something versus change something? So to change something, you have to know that it was going to be one way, but it is now instead another way, right? Now we never know that. We can never know that. We can say, I was walking out my door and I thought I was going to the car, but instead there was a spaceship in front of me and they lifted me up and I spent the rest of my life on Mars. So you could say that the spaceship changed your life, but you don't know that. You don't know if there was ever a situation when you were walking out your door and there wasn't a spaceship. So your life was maybe exactly what it was always going to be, but you just happened to not know that there was going to be a spaceship that took you to Mars, right? So we can never prove change. I mean, with existing technology, we can never prove that it was going to be one way, but now it's this other way. Now, I know we have the experience of it all the time, but that doesn't mean it's true. We're full of all sorts of lies about reality, right? Our perceptual apparatus gives us all sorts of lies in order for us to survive. But we don't necessarily have to believe them. And sometimes for our survival, it's better if we don't believe them. And so that's the change piece. Influence is this idea. So I pick this glass of water up. I take a sip. And we say, as a result or as a consequence, I am now less thirsty. So the water had an influence on me, we say, or the water caused me to be less thirsty. Well, did it? It's anyone's guess. Because we never have a control. It's the same problem as we talk about it differently, but it's the same. There's a relationship. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't know if I believe in causation. There's a relationship between things and it's very consistent. Whenever I drink water, I'm less thirsty. Every time I drink water, I'm less thirsty. Every time I drop a ball, it falls on the ground. Every time I clap my hands, it makes a noise unless I'm in a vacuum. So all of those things are very highly correlated. But is this a dynamic cause? So there's a really interesting book called, I'm going to put it in the chat window, Beyond the Dynamical Universe, which is a whole model of both quantum mechanics and relativity from a philosopher and a physicist, and one other person, I forget what his role is, but in any case, based on the idea that nothing changes, there is no dynamics. There are no dynamics. And I'm kind of partial to it. I mean, I don't know what's really going on. I know I have the experience of things changing and the experience of causation. But again, you know, having grown up in the perceptual world and studied auditory and visual psychophysics and neuroscience, it's clear that what is being shown to us as the contents of reality is not, you know, the contents of reality. So, yeah. So any other questions?
These slides you have showed us, is it possible that you send them by email to me?
The slides that I've shown today? Sure, I
Yeah.
can send by email. Yeah, I'll make it into a PDF
Yep.
because I use this weird program and send it to you. Let me just write a note to myself to do that.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, any more questions?
I've got a small question, if you don't mind. I was thinking about your axis diagram or your axis slide showing the different types of precognition. My thought was that there might be sliding borders between this. For instance, if I think for a second, going past my garage or whatever, then maybe I should do this, and then I just brush it off. And after having walked a couple of more steps, I think, but why did I get that thought? Maybe I should do something about it right away. And then a couple of days, or perhaps even a week later, I figure, oh, I'm glad I did that.
Yeah, I didn't show it, but I think of it that way. I think of these as fuzzy borders. These are fuzzy. Nothing is chopped up in some sort of discrete units. This is an integrable domain. Absolutely.
All right. Are we getting filled up with all these ideas, or any more questions? Okay, it seems like we are very happy with these ideas from you, Julia. Very nice.
I'm glad.
Get these ideas, rather new for many of us, but to attack this time aspect of reality is quite fascinating. And there are very few persons doing that.
Well, time to me, I mean, since I was a kid, I would lie in bed and I would get very angry because it seems to me all the world's governments should be putting lots of resources into time travel, because once you solve time travel, everything else is solved.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm.
So, you know, if you have like warheads coming at your country and they'll land in 15 minutes, you go into your time machine, you spend your time figuring out exactly what the right response is and building whatever tool you need to respond to it. And then you come out and you use the tool. So it's, to me, obviously important. So thank you.
Yeah, okay. So thank you very much for this time you spent with us. I'm very glad for that.
And thank you. It's been really fun. And thanks for speaking English.
Yes.
And so appreciate it.
Yeah. Maybe we'll see it. Will you be at the PA convention, SSE, and
Sure, if they accept our abstract, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Right.
So
Take care.
bye-bye, Julia.
Bye, everybody. Lots of love.
Thank you.